Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, collectors of all ages, it is AussieVerse, and we are back, baby, at a very special time. Yes, it is very late for us Australians, but it is very early for most of the Americans. I am Omnibo, joined by Sharif, Single Issue Steve, and the man that is stepping first time into the AussieVerse. It is the founder of Boom Studios, Mr. Ross Richie. How are you, dude? Thank you for coming on.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you. That was very exciting.
Thank you very much. I try. We already have some comments here. Madam, thank you very much for joining us. James, boom, that's correct, mate. And Claudia, hi, guys. Okay. Ross, first off, how are you? Thank you for getting up so early.
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for agreeing to come on, trying to get their YouTube channel. It's very, 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 very nice. I really appreciate it. All right. Well, let's get down to business, shall we? Before we do that, though, we do want to give a shout out to our members, our paid members. They are called For Lifers. That is Azzarello85, The Fourth Monkey, Ali, Ben Sullivan, and Simple Simon. We really appreciate your contributions, but remember that paid membership is not required. The best thing you can do to help AussieVerse is by subscribing to the channel. And as normal, we are always proudly sponsored by Comic Bookaroo, Australia's #1 online comic book store. Ross, I'm going to start at the beginning, I guess, with Boom Studios. How was it with those early years trying to start up this company? Because I know that you started at Malibu.
Yes.
You had a few relationships there, business networking, and Boom Studios came aboard. How did that all start?
Well, it's a bit of a long, complicated story. So I know it's late at night for you, so kick back with a cup of coffee. And when you're done with your coffee, maybe I'll be done with my story. So I had worked at Malibu, and then I left Malibu a little bit after Marvel buying them. And then I worked in Hollywood as a script reader, ultimately reading scripts for Arnold Schwarzenegger. And during that time, I really maintained my relationships with the comic book creative community. And so through that, I had gotten a phone call from Keith Giffen. And Keith, if your audience is unfamiliar, Keith was a comic book creator who worked for Marvel and DC. He co-created Rocket Raccoon and sort of did the creative version of Drax the Destroyer that they used for the Guardians of the Galaxy, amongst many other creative accomplishments. And so I was a huge fan of Keith's, and Keith called me and asked me to critique a movie deal that he had, because I was running around Hollywood at the time, and we created a friendship. And he invited me to write a comic book at Image called Dominion that Keith would draw. And I explained to Keith that this was insanity and that I was not a writer. And Keith was very insistent. And if you knew Keith, you would know that he was curmudgeonly, as a very kind way to put it. Maybe insistent, determined, irascible, unmovable, cantankerous. There's all sorts of descriptors that we could use for Keith, all of which he would co-sign. And so he won and I lost, and I ended up writing this book at Image. And the sales, unfortunately, didn't get us very far, and so the book got canceled. But the friendship with Keith was a really big force that changed my life. And there was a guy who inked the second issue named Dave Elliott. And this is deep, deep, deep comic book lore. Dave, in the late 80s, Dave was British. And in the late 80s, he had a company called Atomica, and it's spelled Atomeka. And they had published a wide range of material from creators that would be known as Alan Moore. And in the late 80s, there was this young upstart creator named Grant Morrison. And it was just a murderer's row of some of the greatest British talent of all time. I could go on and on and on and on. So he wanted to revive Atomica. And this is a time period, this is around 2004, when graphic novel collections are exploding. And so there's a real audience for all the graphic novels that the three of you have in your background, because there was a time period when that was, a rare thing. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted to put that back into print, and I offered to help him. And I helped revive Atomica. The other partner that he brought in was a legend that I was a huge fan of, a guy named Gary Leach, who is the co-creator of Miracle Man, also known as Marvel Man in the UK, which was, of course, written by Alan Moore. So we brought Atomica back. And when we did that, I called Keith and I said, hey, you do this, funny Justice League comic book at DC, Justice League International, or there's, people call it a bunch of different names, but it's the Funny Justice League version. And I love that. And why don't you do the Funny Justice League, but make it creator owned? And you could just basically do a superhero team with the names filed off. So it's be thinly veiled versions of the characters we all know and love. And Keith said, no. He said, that sounds like that sucks. And I'm going to create a new idea. But you got to go get J.M. DeMatteis. And DeMatteis, it goes by the name Mark. And so I called up Mark, and Mark foolishly agreed to participate. And Keith and Mark got together and created Hero Squared. And that was the first comic book I published, along with Zombie Tales. And
yes.
That launched basically in the time that I launched that. So, like, what's interesting about Zombie Tales for the super nerds is that Atomica sort of went its own way, and like Atomica and I split. Wow. Impressive. Well done. Thank you, sir. Atomica and I split, and Zombie Tales was solicited under Atomica, but shipped under Boom. I think when you look at it, it has both logos on it. So that's kind of the hinge, because I think Hero Squared Exercise Special #1 was a fully Atomica project. So Keith and Mark took Hero Squared to Boom. Basically the storyline is that Keith came out for a convention to support Hero Squared Exercise Special #1, which was the first issue, and talked me into starting Boom. And you'll notice Keith sort of pursued me over and over and over again. And Keith said, you really need to publish, you need to start your own company, you need to publish comics. And I told Keith, like, the list of defunct comic book companies is enormous. And I'm a big 80s independent comic book fan. I'm a big 90s independent comic book fan. And so I could rattle off probably 35 company names of things that people forgot. And Keith just didn't care. Keith was like, just do it. Just do it. Shut up. Stop making excuses. Stop being weak. Do it. And that's like what Keith, would do. He would just unrelenting. And so I got up the next morning and I thought, Keith's had a long career. Longevity is a powerful thing. And Keith knows Keith's worked for a lot of those companies that went defunct. And he knows what it takes to survive in the business. So I should give this a shot. And Boom was born. And that's how I started Boom. It's Keith Giffen's fault.
And I think a lot of us will have to say thanks to him, because out of you being pushed by him, so much wealth of material just came out.
Thank you. Well, I certainly have to thank him so much. He passed away a couple of years back, and it was horrific to lose him. But it was absolutely, it was, you know, Keith, if you go back and you look at his career and you get his friends together and they all start comparing stories over and over and over and over again, he saw people around him with potential, and he used his commercial viability in the market to elevate other creators, writers and artists, and support them, people he believed in. And there is no question there would be no Boom without Keith. And it was absolutely, he gave me a career of which I'll always be grateful.
Oh,
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
so with Keith and all the other comic creators that had their finger in the formation of Boom, talking about creators, then how did Boom acquire creators to come on board? Did you or did Boom approach them, or did the writers pitch a story to Boom to find a house?
Well, the key is to not be friends with me. So if you want to escape, don't talk to me. So I used to go over, I don't know if you're familiar with Dave Johnson. He's one of the greatest comic book cover artists of all time. I met Dave back when he was doing Super Patriot for Image Comics in the early 90s, and I was at Malibu. And I thought he was one of the most promising early creators. And around the time, brand new creators that was breaking in. And around the time that I was starting Boom, he was doing an award-winning run of covers on Detective Comics. And so I would go over to his house and play Xbox games, and we would drink beer and go play paintball. And so Dave did the cover to Zombie Tales #1. And so I hit up Dave and I was like, I can promise you dozens of dollars. I'll promise you that absolutely nobody's going to see this because it's going to be a low print run book, because who am I and what is Boom? It's nothing. And Dave very gallantly and kindly agreed to provide the cover for Zombie Tales. There's a story in there written by Johanna Stokes, who happens to be my wife. She was a screenwriter on Eureka at the time, a big show on the Sci-Fi Channel here in the States. I don't know how it was syndicated in Australia or even if it was shown there. But the great thing about Johanna was I didn't have to pay her. So, that's one of my favorite qualities. And then, come on, honey, help. And so Keith drew Johanna's story, and I actually paid Keith. And then Keith wrote a story that he said, why don't you call Ron Lim? And I was like, are you kidding me? Because, of course, I was a huge Ron Lim fan. And so Ron Lim got kissed into the project by Keith. And all the kind of creators, it was basically, let's all get together and see what we can do. And so Mark Waid was friends with my wife. Exactly how that happened, I can't quite remember, but I'd worked in the business, and so I was friends with folks, and I definitely got to know Mark back in my Malibu days. So basically Mark complained in that first Zombie Tales #1 because he got a 6-page story and everybody else got an 8-page story. And I explained to Mark that the problem was my wife gets to have 8 pages to tell her story because I'm not paying her. And I'm paying you, and you're more expensive, so you only get 6 pages. So, he couldn't argue with that logic. So these are the horrible decisions you make being a publisher. So basically, it was just a bunch of crew buddies, folks. I had a Hollywood background, and my wife was working in the business, and so there's different folks. I mean, if you really want, here's a deep cut that you don't see coming. So there's a book I did called Cthulhu Tales, and in it, I think it's the second go around. It might be the first. It says there's a story called "Are You There, Cthulhu? It's Me, Margaret," and it's written by Henry Alonzo Myers, who's actually the current showrunner of Star Trek. So,
oh, wow.
If you're loving the new Star Trek show, the Brave New Worlds, that's Henry 20 years ago, was kind enough. He was one of my old buddies. He read scripts right next to me at the William Morris Agency. So he and I were kind of in the mailroom together back in the day. So
It's so cool.
old man stories. Back in my day.
That's me. Not like these young blokes. We're probably similar age, mate, I reckon.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get my driver's license and be legal drinking age anytime. It's gonna happen soon.
Well, a bit beyond that.
But
Cool. Shrek?
so funny when you mention Mark Waid, because man, I do, there isn't enough words to describe how much I love his run on The Flash, and then when he got involved in Boom, if I'm not mistaken, he at one time he was the editor in chief, I guess.
That's great.
And then this magnificent run called Irredeemable came out,
Yeah.
and man, what was the question? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought when
No worries.
his
Pretty
name came
dark.
up.
It's pretty rough.
What can you tell us about your working relationship with him before and while he's there?
Well, I really tried to kind of, for the most part, stay out of the way with Mark. I mean, as a publisher, there were certain deals that you do. I think at the time we were doing Farscape, and we might have been at the tail end of the Warhammer stuff, which is not necessarily Mark's cup of tea. I don't know how he feels about Farscape. I don't think we ever talked about it, but we bring in different creators, and but Mark was really the guy that was driving the assignments for the artists with the writers. And so, it's like I really, the business side of the company was really taking off. And so my phone was ringing, and there was a lot of Hollywood stuff going on. And so it was a good time to hand the creative over to Waid and let him do his thing. So I was thrilled he came aboard and thankful for the time that we had together.
That's cool. And just, Ross, touch on that Warhammer stuff, because I'm sorry. I've been a 30-year plus Warhammer tabletop gamer myself, so I love the universe and really interested in it. And how difficult was it working with the guys from Game Workshop to get the licensing, because they're super, super protective of their IP? I mean, anyone does anything slightly Games Workshop looking, they'll jump straight on it, so they're really good with that. How was it working with Games Workshop? Because you produced, 40-odd books and about 9 graphic novels or something like that?
They were great. They were great. I had no problems. So what helps is to hire Dan Abnett, and I'm not trying to be funny, right? So we were very, we had Graham McNeil and other folks that had written content for them. And so that got the stories where they needed to be. And Graham and Dan were a dream, terrific. The Warhammer story that I would tell that is indicative of the difference between working with a company that creates miniatures and a company that does comic books is the first issue that we drew was summarily destroyed. The art. And what's interesting about licensing is, generally speaking, it's a marriage. It's kind of you could say a shotgun marriage or an arranged marriage, 2 folks that go in with the best of intentions, and you discover that you see the world in very different ways. And so the trick is to figure out how the other person sees the world and where that Venn diagram can cross over. And so that's a really long-winded introduction to so comic book art is not realistic. And so this is the legacy of Jack Kirby, and it's also the legacy of Neil Adams. And so the artist, I think it was Louis Antonio, if my memory serves correct, he had done very aggressive, foreshortened, dynamic figures that were twisting and turning in space. And what's interesting about Games Workshop is if you have to generate hundreds of thousands, if not millions of miniatures with designs, when you have a Space Marine and you're getting these sculptors to make the Space Marines, all the Space Marines need to have the same body dimensions. So Warhammer, Games Workshop had a distance from the neck to the shoulder on a Space Marine is consistent on every Space Marine. And Space Marines are yay high and they're yay wide. And these are, now their armor might change, or the decorations, all these different things, the posing, blah, 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 but the body specs don't. And so what they did to try to explain to us how they saw the world in a different way was they took Louis' work, put it into, I think, a Wacom tablet, and drew over it, this shoulder's too wide in relationship to the hips, in relationship to the length of the legs. Like when you look at Neil Adams' art, his dude's legs are like, his legs are so long and compared, those Batman, classic Batman art. So it's like comic book artists exaggerate and don't particularly worry about how realistic it is. And so we had to go back in and basically completely adjust how we drew all these things. And once we made that adjustment, then we understood when we would onboard a comic book artist, we could go, hey, here's the rules of the game, no pun intended. This is how this works, and carry them through that. And once we had that finessed, we had a great relationship.
Cool.
Interesting. We are jumping around just a little bit, so I apologize, but I did want to ask, you did touch on this briefly, but in this very competitive market, Ross, to get into that industry, did you have some sort of, I'm assuming you had a battle plan, but what was the first sort of moves that you did to get into that position, to compete with the Marvels and the DCs and all that sort of stuff? How did that go about?
Well, first is a mindset, which is, my mindset was, I don't compete with Marvel and DC. Something I have two daughters, a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and something I really kind of drum into them is, you're not in competition with anyone else, you're in competition with yourself. And so you need to go strive to do the best that you can do, and then you can see if you can do better or more once you've had that first round. The classic NFL example is win or learn. And so there is no, mistakes are part of the learning process. And so what I was able to do, I was trafficking on relationships originally. So Keith was obviously a prime mover, and I consistently called him up and asked for projects. And if you go back and look at our first year publishing, it's filled with Keith Giffen projects. And then beyond that, Zombie Tales, for example, trafficked on either Keith's relationships or my relationships. And what I was just trying to do is, in the early period, you just don't understand how hard it is to edit a comic book, put it together, and get it out. And it's insanely difficult. I got, artists in particular, it's such a tremendous amount of work to draw a comic book. And I was sort of beside myself, and I called up a buddy of mine who had worked for DC, who will go unnamed for a long time, and had a very consistent career. And I said, hey, how do you get a comic book artist to turn their pages in? because he always turned his pages in and he was on time and monthly for like 20 years. And he said, get him married. And, you know, it's like when you got bills to pay where it's like, hey, honey, we have to pay the electric bill. You know, you get paid when you turn your pages in, right? So going through all of that, sort of process brick by brick of how do you get a book out? Okay, how do you get 2 books out? Okay, so you've gone from doing 1 comic book monthly to 2 comic books monthly. Now think about that's 100% increase in workflow. Right, that's a lot. Right. Yeah. Now you go from 2 monthlies to 3 monthlies to 4 monthlies. A year later, well, you 400% X'd your output. So like I wouldn't even look at Marvel and DC. You know, like for the most part, I kept my head down, never really cared. It's a different game, right? They sell their catalog, and it's the greatest mythology that the world has ever known. You know, it's like there's nothing that beats those fictional worlds. And so they just have a different focus. And I was just focused on, the line of publishing shifted and changed. And I wanted that. I wanted to be able to bob and weave and go to different elements as they popped up. You know, it's like we did all that Warhammer work, and then Warhammer went away, and we did Disney, and Disney went away. And, you know, it was hilarious to me because when the Disney stuff, it's kind of a funny era of the company to talk about, because we had initiated Pixar and Muppets comics. Yeah. And they initially were very warmly greeted. And this is before the trend to publish comics for kids. And we were told by representatives at Diamond Comics Distributors that kids don't read comics. So why are you publishing comics for kids? Which I was like, exactly. And now there's a front of the comic shop. Just about every comic shop I walk into has a kids section. And that didn't exist before we did the Pixar and Muppets comics. And at the same time, there was this inverse relationship where our publishing on the Disney stuff was really warmly greeted. The company grew on all fronts. If you go back and you look, we were doing Dream of Electric Sheep with Philip K. Dick and a bunch of projects, irredeemable overlaps in that. And basically, the Disney publishing starts to diminish and diminish and diminish, and the company starts to grow and grow and grow. And in that crossover, Disney buys Marvel. And then everybody on the internet completely panics. And they're like, oh no, Disney's going to pull the licenses from Boom and give them to Marvel. And Boom's going to go out of business. And what they didn't know was that the sales on the Disney stuff were diminishing to the point where we were probably going to need to sunset them anyway. So when it came time to update the license for the next contractual, I forgot if it was 2 years or 3 years in the publishing, Disney did decide to take the characters away and give them to Marvel. And I was relieved. And we licensed Adventure Time and sold like 1.5 million copies of Adventure Time. And it was like far more commercially successful than anything we ever did with Disney. But I'm always grateful for the Disney time, because doing those Pixar books and the Muppet books were a big moment for us at the time. So it's always run your own race, do your own thing. I had a tendency to see opportunities in the market that other people didn't, like kid publishing. I'm a bit more of a zig when everyone zags kind of guy. And so that puts us in a different place than other people. I think if you're chasing what everyone's chasing, what makes you different?
I love that advice you gave your daughter. That's really, really good.
Thank you.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Comic Bookaroo. Comic Bookaroo, proud sponsors of AussieVerse for all your comic book needs. Graphic novels, hardcovers,
omnibuses, single issues. Don't forget to pre-order every Sunday at Comic Bookaroo.
And we're back. So touching on the kids, I've got it. That's right. It was Boom Kids at first, wasn't it? And then what made you decide to change that to Kaboom?
Well, you're spinning so many plates, especially when the company was that size and there was not a lot of folks. And so, you're going from sort of fire to fire to fire as a firefighter that you're trying to put these fires out. And so originally, I want to say the imprint was announced as Zoom. And there was a kids TV show in the late 70s in the US named Zoom. And they, good morning, Eamon. How are you? Thanks for showing up. So Zoom zealously protected their trademarks and saw our announcement and threatened us. It was wild. I was like, wow. And that's also sort of you're not thinking through how are you making announcements? When are you making announcements? Do you have the trademark? That's important. So I think that at the end of the day, the notion was to go with Kaboom because it's a fun word to say. So, that's important. So I wish I had a sophisticated answer.
Well, not everything has to be sophisticated. It always makes me think of Marvin the Martian when I hear that word, the kaboom. Kaboom.
I love it.
Shattering kaboom.
I love it.
All right. Next question, guys.
Ross, earlier you've mentioned about just recently trademarking and then licensing with Disney and all that. But one of the bigger licensing works that Boom had were like the Power Rangers or Firefly or even the Buffyverse. What were the kind of conversations and stuff that were discussed behind doors to get that license on board so that you can reach to a bigger and wider audience to the material?
Well, one of the things I wanted to do with Boom was I wanted it to not be the Ross show. So I wanted the folks who worked for me to be able to pursue the things that they cared about and they loved and bring those things to the table. And which is not to say I said yes to everything pitched to me, but my assistant was Bryce Carlson, and Bryce became an editor and over time became VP of editorial. And I think now he's VP of publishing. So, I'm certain that in 3 to 5 years, I'll be working for Bryce, even though I'm retired. Great dude, pure, amazing talent, really, really just the best. One of my favorite people. And Bryce came to me and he said, I really want to do the Power Rangers. Daphne and I have been talking. Daphne was the editor on the Power Rangers stuff originally for a really long time. And he was like, I think that this would be really cool. And here's what we think we can land the deal at. And I am too old for the Power Rangers, just to be blunt. And so
too old for the Power Rangers.
let me put it this way. When it first came around, I was not the right age. And so I'm a believer in when things are successful, I don't think it's a fluke. I don't think all these people that love Power Rangers are stupid. I didn't look at the IP with any skepticism or negativity. I was like, this is popular for a reason, and people love this for a reason. And so I trust you, Bryce. And he sort of pitched to me his take. And I said, let's go do it. And so the result was this sort of groundbreaking, huge run of Power Rangers stuff. And one of my great joys was getting an advance copy of the first issue and sitting down in my office and reading it, and going to Bryce afterwards and going like, you know, the vision, Bryce and Daphne, the vision just really came together and was clear. And, you know, I think the thing that they need to get credit for that I'm not on the Power Rangers fandom, like in the Discords. So I don't know, maybe they're saying this, but if they're not, I really want to highlight this of the real triumph, I think, creatively of that book. I had nothing to do with. It was the vision was not to do, like if you look at it now as an adult, it's a kid's show, right?
Mm.
But when you're a kid and you're watching it, it's serious as cancer. Right?
Yeah.
And so the vision was we're going to make the comic book like the TV show that we thought we saw.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yes, and I can safely say that mission accomplished, because the stories in there right now are much more geared towards the same group of people who grew up on Power Rangers. It just takes.
Yeah, that's that team. You know, Bryce and Daphne, and I don't know who originated the idea first. And I should credit, you know, Kyle Higgins, the original writer. Maybe it was his idea. I don't know. I wasn't in those conversations. But, you know, that's what I think they really nailed. And I think that's why that has been such a success. So then in regards to Buffy, you know, we had Fox invest in the company and buy a chunk of the company. And during those conversations was a desire to make Boom Fox's comic book company. And Fox had the rights to the Buffyverse. And so that's how that material migrated from Dark Horse over to Boom. And we had Sierra Hahn was an editor that was working at the company who knew Joss and had worked with Joss and had a relationship with Joss. And so that was a very natural thing to move that content over to her. So there's the exciting part about how comic book licenses come together.
Yeah, cool.
And just sort of a flow on from that as well, Ross, in regards to the film adaptations that you guys have been doing as well. I mean, you've done one for a book called, the movie's called Nightbreed, the Clive Barker one. The book's actually called Cabal. It's one of my favorite books. I absolutely love it. And like the guys, stuff you did with the 28 days later and the 28 weeks later, what made you sort of move into that film adaptation kind of area? Because it's something a little bit different from the stuff that you normally kind of do.
Well, two fun answers for you. So the first is, Fox had, before Fox invested in Boom, Fox had a division of their company that was called Fox Atomic. And Fox Atomic had been talking to Boom. We were based in LA, they were based in LA, and we were talking about collaborating. And the concept was that how do you marry a comic book company and a movie company together? And how do you have a close relationship? And so we would get together and kind of do a chalkboard and be like, okay, what if, you know, they wanted to buy Two Guns, which ultimately got made by Universal. And so it was like, we want your next cool comic book to turn into a movie. But at the same time, it's like Boom didn't want to be stuck with Fox Atomic if they didn't like the next thing that we published. So we didn't want to be an exclusive relationship. But it was like they could take our comic books and turn them into movies if they liked it and we liked it. And then at the same time, they might have had ideas that we could turn into comic books that they would turn into movies. And then they had these brands. So like one of the brands that they were really investing in Thomas Ligotti, who was a novelist, and they were really investing in the 28 Days Later franchise, which was a low budget movie that had been made at Fox that had done really well that they were going to sequelize. And so I was like, let's get going on 28 Days Later. That's a natural. Walking Dead's gigantic. And of course, everybody loves 28 Days Later. And so let's go make those comics. And we put together the 28 Days Later book. We also did Die Hard. It was Die Hard Year One. And then they shuttered Fox Atomic as a division, just destroyed it one way. So that's how we ended up with 28 Days Later comics. And I was like, these are cool. These are awesome. Let's keep going. And we did those. And Declan Shalby did a phenomenal job. And Michael Allen Nelson, who's a very close friend, did a great job writing that. And that was an epic era. What was the other license that you were asking? Oh, the movie you were talking about. Films.
The Clive Barker.
Oh, Clive Barker. So Matt Gagnon, who is my editor-in-chief after Mark Waid, he used to work at a comic book, legendary comic book store, which is now closed, that was on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles called Meltdown. And Clive Barker would come in and buy comics at Meltdown. And so I've forgotten how the conversation had happened, but basically I found myself driving to Clive Barker's house with Matt Gagnon. And so we hung out with Clive Barker in his house. So these are the places that comic books will take you.
Very cool.
Yeah, very blessed. Clive was absolutely fantastic and delightful. And I think we were in like a 2-hour conversation or 2.5-hour conversation. And he was like, I need to go to the bathroom. And we were like, all right, great. Yeah, we've been hanging out a long time. And he came back and he sat down and he said, I wish I could remember this exactly because his British accent, it's so perfect. He said, are we not men of good, I think it was good valor? And Matt and I and Clive looked at each other and said, yeah. And he said, then we should work together. I have only ever touched Hellraiser twice. I wrote the Hellbound Heart novel and I directed the first movie. Let's do Hellraiser comics. And there's one answer when Clive Barker says, let's do this. The answer is yes. Yeah. And so everything that came after that was Clive saying, let's do, and me saying yes. So are we not men of good valor?
Yeah, that's great.
Ross, you make it sound like all these people just live around the corner and
well, it helps to live in LA, that's for sure. That makes a difference. But I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've ended up in comic books. I'm in the car and I'm driving somewhere and I'm like, I have no idea how this happened.
The stars just seem to align itself and everything falls into place.
Well, the past 20 years, something worth noting is people love comics. Like the mainstream has really come to comics. And, Clive always loved comics back in the late 80s and the 90s, did a lot of comic book publishing. And, but, these other figures, like Fox entertaining a conversation in the mid-aughts about sort of how do we collaborate. Maybe it was more like 2009. That was very rare. I definitely remember running around the Hollywood studio system and, people were scoffing at comic books, so it was a rich era to have a comic book company. So I don't miss the stress.
Yeah.
It's nice.
We are running out of time, so I'm going to skip some questions and just move on to a couple of other things here. And that is, Ross, you have your own YouTube channel as well.
Thank you.
That I recently discovered. And it's actually a really, really great channel because not only do you have interview after interview after interview with so many high-profile comic book people, but the thing that I was very interested in and grateful of the other stuff that you put on there is a little bit of insights into things that your everyday people, like, you know, myself, may not even have thought about. Like, for example, I saw your video about the unsolicited mail. And to me, that's fascinating because, you know, you have these questions in your mind about, oh, what if I did this, or how could you do this, or how does this work? And in 2 minutes, I think it wasn't a long video at all. You've pretty much summed up those answers and told people watching what unsolicited mail is, what it means, why you can't do anything with it, and why it's not a good idea. And I'm just wanted you to know how grateful as a viewer I am for you to go out of your way and make that sort of content. So I do recommend everybody go check that out. Even if comic book creator interviews isn't your thing, but you want to get a little bit of insight into the way previous CEO thinks, it's a really good channel to do that. So is that just something that you do for your own fun, or is there something that you're trying to do with that YouTube channel?
Well, it's interesting to me because, like, you know, there was a time period at San Diego Comic-Con. This is going to be a bit of a ramble, so forgive me. There was a time period at San Diego Comic-Con where I would love to take my my badge and I would turn it around so nobody could see my name, and I would sneak into the front of the booth to sell the comics straight to the fans, and fans would come up and they don't know who you are, right? And that for me was, this is your customer. This is the person that's spending their hard-earned money. Why are they buying this comic book over that comic book? When you pitch what a comic book is, what are the things that they love, get excited by, what closes the sale, which book's selling at this convention, why? All that stuff, I mean, that's the game, right? It's like, if you make comic books that people don't buy, you go out of business. And people buy comic books not because they're stupid, not because they have weird ideas. They react to certain things in certain ways. And so what are those things? I need to extract and understand, why do they do that? Now, social media's, now the punchline on San Diego is people figured out what I look like. And then I'd go to the front to sell comics, and then all these folks would be like, oh, this is my chance to be a rock star, and I'm going to get Ross's attention. And then I couldn't do what I was trying to do, which, like, I don't blame these folks. They want to be published. I'm not saying anything negative about that. Yeah. But my goal of being able to get some interaction, direct interaction, and understand my customer was not possible. And so I just didn't go to the booth, you know, at all anymore. Because you get pinned down. But the social media is similar to this, where it's like, I can put a post up and then I can see this post, how is it doing relative to what I posted yesterday? And why is this working and this other thing isn't working? I liked the other thing. I thought it was a better idea. And this thing that I put up today, which I kind of did before breakfast and didn't think about much, is like rocketing. And so why are people reacting to that? And so for me, I think of it as like, keep your sword sharp, right? Is like, pay attention to the market. The market changes all the time. What people are interested in changes all the time. And I get these very consistent questions. And it's, I want to pitch you a project, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, hey, dummy, the dummy's me, okay? People are confused. So try to give an answer, right? So I'll try to, there's a bunch of things when you're on the other side that it's hard to say because fans will take it wrong. And it's not intended that way. And so can you communicate, here's why we can't take unsolicited submissions. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with us. And can that be communicated in an effective way? And it's a bit of a risk, right? You get it wrong and you end up written up on Bleeding Cool and everyone hates you and you're canceled and screaming at you on Twitter. Which, by the way, I wish, no dig on Rich. He's just doing his job, but it's, I wish we had a little bit more love and understanding and compassion for all sides, for everybody, which is not to say that people don't do horrible, vicious things and shouldn't be held accountable for that. But at the same time, it would be nice if we didn't react with extreme volatility very quickly, always. But me just trying to communicate, direct, to try to have a relationship, to be able to understand, to stay in touch, to keep the sword sharp. That's really what's driving all that stuff. And I really appreciate you talking about the creator interviews, because I was really trying to do a long form interview with people that were at the forefront of the market and explain how they broke into comics. Mark Waid has a joke. Every time somebody figures out how to break into comics goes over there and creates a brick wall and prevents you from breaking into comics that way. So it's, every creator has a different story. Every once in a while on my Facebook, for instance, sometimes I do it on Instagram, I do a post which is like, how did you break into comics? Talk about it in the comments. And what I'm hoping is that somebody who wants to break into comics reads all these different stories and either gets inspiration or understands that it's not done the same way every time. And the other thing was like the craft of how do these different comic book writers think? How do they approach their material? How do they do what they do in these long form interviews? Because that'll be inspiration to the next James Tynion or the next, Mark Waid, or, there's constant interest in how are comics made. And there wasn't a venue that I saw where somebody was just like letting a creator talk about the creative process. And I knew enough about how the sausage was made to ask the right questions. I thought that was my approach. Whereas a lot of times the interview might be about, Wade's famous for doing a run on Flash. It might be about Flash continuity or working at DC Comics. Like I was interested in writing, what's the craft? How do you make the comics? So that folks coming up, hoping to break in, could use those as a resource.
Okay. I was going to ask this one as well, because in one of the posts in a Facebook group, Ben Mulder wanted to ask this question, but Iman has asked it as well in a roundabout way. He's gone, other than Something Is Killing the Children, what other boombox comics would you like to see turn into a movie or a TV show? Ben Mulder wanted me to ask you about the Something Is Killing the Children movie or TV show, and if you can't comment on that, no worries.
Well, it's public information that it's in development at Netflix as a TV show, and that's the most I can comment on. But the answer I'm going to give is going to be really easy, and it's going to be cheeky, and everyone's going to groan as soon as I say it, but I'm going to say Berserker. So
yeah,
I'd like to come to the set in the morning and have a cup of coffee and high five Keanu. That would be cool.
Yeah.
It's good, dude. Yeah.
My slipcase is on the way for that, actually. It got delayed because it was damaged, so a replacement's coming, but it's coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the support.
Oh, of course. Steve, have you got anything left for Mr. Richie? We've been, I know you got a little bit of delay, so we've been
Stop talking so I can ask my question. Final question from me, Ross, is what are the three biggest selling titles, and what would you recommend personally for someone who wants to find out more about Boom? Where's a good starting point as a reading starting point?
Well, the first two answers are pretty easy. So that would be Berserker and Something's Killing the Children. And I think they're pretty accessible to folks that have not read them. And then a third is one of my personal favorites, which is Once and Future. And that's just my personal taste. Looking at Bo's screen, maybe the answer should be Klaus as well, because Grant Morrison and Dan Mora are awesome. Either one of those. I'm going to cheat because I can, and I'm going to say Klaus / Once and Future.
Well, you just answered another question that we had, because when we've had a discussion, is it Claus or Klaus? I think someone's just broken into your house with a car, Sharif. And yeah, to me, it was Klaus, and Steve agreed, and we just weren't sure. So thanks for that. Sharif, your last question, sir.
I've got a question about Kickstarters.
Yes.
Recently, Boom has been really active on Kickstarters. I've backed at least a couple.
Thank you.
First one was this massive book right there, and funny how you mentioned Klaus, because I've got this one.
Thank you.
Beautiful book.
Thank you.
So my question is, how does Boom decide which
Thanks, Eamon.
Which book or which property to actually put out through Kickstarter? Because these books have come out before, but then it's all prettied up. So how do you decide?
It's a kind of an unglamorous answer because, first of all, endless debate and argument. And then the second would be they're bestsellers, but what we're doing is if we think we can repackage them. And the thing that's the secret to fans like y'all, which all three of you are like hardcore deep folks that buy deluxe editions. And what is hard for you to see and understand is there's not a lot of y'all in the market. And generally speaking, retailers, the way that you go out of business in retail, any kind of retail, is too much inventory. Okay. And really the way to go out of business fast is too much expensive inventory. So as much as y'all love the high-end hardcovers that are expensive to create and go for a high retail price, retailers don't order them because, you know, a $50, $75, $100, $150 hardcover, if you order too many of them, your cash is locked up in that inventory and you go out of business. And so the Kickstarters, we sort of targeted, once we broke through on that market, doing those high-end expensive hardcovers because we can get directly to the fans that want them. And the retailers are relieved of the burden of ordering them. And we give them an opportunity to order them, but they don't, sort of get stuck with having to order a bunch and stuck in inventory. And it sort of kills all the birds with one stone. So there's the unglamorous.
And I have noticed that some Kickstarters have an option, a retailer option where they can get like five sets of books, so that they don't get left out of.
Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't invent that. That was sort of anytime direct market folks did Kickstarters, they had tiers that would offer retailers that were interested to be able to order enough of a quantity to make it a wholesale price. So happy to do that.
Sweet.
Okay.
Cool.
So Ross, what does your future entail? Now that you've sold Boom and onto bigger and better things, is the saying?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time with my family. My 12-year-old daughter has become a fairly serious volleyball player. And so those tournaments are no joke. They are pretty demanding, and there's a lot of travel. And so she's got practices. She's got workouts. They have 12-year-olds lifting weights now. It's crazy.
Wow,
and so it's a lot of work. And so at the same time, I just went to San Antonio, which is my hometown. They had a tiny little show there called Casa Comic Arts San Antonio. And they hosted me there as a guest, which was wonderful. It was just one day. But I was able to take my 9-year-old on her birthday that she was turning 10, and she created her own comic book called Dragon Cats.
Oh,
which,
wow.
I love to say, guess what it's about? Exactly. And that's from the guy that has a company named Boom, or had a company named Boom, whose early publications were things like Zombie Tales, which is like, guess what it's about? And so, getting to spend the time with my 9 turning 10-year-old, where she was able to sit as a professional. She sold, by the way, she made 20 copies and sold out at $5 a crack. And I was really proud of her. And I made her a little commission sign. And so for $1, she would draw you a dragon cat, and for $3, she'd do it in color. And for $5, she would take your cat and make it a dragon cat.
Oh, wow.
So, and she ended up cleaning up with that. She made like, I want to say like $30 doing commissions, which at those rates, that's a lot of commissions. So she did well. And so, that's kind of, that gave me an opportunity to come back and see my mom, who's still living in San Antonio, and a bunch of high school friends. And so the crazy thing is, we're all comic book nerds, so I can use this language. Now that my quest is done, I'm discovering there are so many side quests. And so I'm just living in side quests. So I'm trying to clean out the garage, which I'm a comic book collector, so you can imagine what that looks like. And, there's just so much stuff to do. It's crazy. Like, I had to do my wife's taxes for her company. She's a screenwriter, and so she has like a holding company. And a comic book person doing taxes. This is not pretty. It took me way too long. So I'm just side questing it up. And enjoying no stress. I've learned how to do breathing exercises and cold plunges, and I might actually live to see 60. It'd be amazing. No heart attack.
This has been really good, Ross. I really appreciate it. For those that don't know, there was a muck up with the schedule yesterday, and Ross was such a gentleman. You've got a big caliber guest on the show, and the last thing you ever want to do is waste somebody's time.
It's all right. No worries, man. No worries.
So I really appreciate it.
No worries. Let's just say, as comic book folks, and I include myself in this, math is not a strength. And we're sitting there trying to, deal with an 18 to 20 hour time difference and figure out where the windows are. So I'm just appreciative of you having me. So thank you.
Awesome. We do have one more question though for you. Steve, if you want to ask the question of the night.
Oh, no pressure. Jeez. So obviously with Boom Studios being acquired by Random House I think it was mid-September. What's that do with the brand for Boom? Have you found, like, any exposure that you've had to it, that the acquisitions actually help build the brand a little bit more? It's coming up a little bit more. Not that question.
Steve, that wasn't what I was leading to. We'll try to end the show, mate. I'll ask another question. Right. But you've already asked it now, so maybe you can get a quick answer.
Well, I left, so I don't know.
Cool.
I'm unemployed. So.
Oh, dear.
Sorry, that's not an exciting answer.
That's right. I completely balls it up.
That's right. Sharif, I'd give you the second go around to make up for Steve, but you always muck it up as well. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Right? So, Mr. Richie, sir, if I had to say to you, what is AussieVerse? What would your answer be?
For life.
Yeah! That is fantastic, Ross. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You have been an absolute breath of fresh air. You are an absolute gentleman, superstar in our eyes. It has been fantastic. Love to have you back on again someday. We wish you all the best, mate. All the best in your future endeavors, which is a sentence I hate saying because that sounds like we're firing you. But we really mean it. Is there any last words of advice before we close it out?
No, I just want to thank you for having me as a guest, and it was really great to see everybody's comments in the chat, and I hope everyone has a spectacular week.
Good idea. Excellent. We will see you this coming Wednesday as per normal for our pre-order Cutoff Video, which is the same time every single week. Don't forget, we are sponsored by that was that was the stuff up, that one. Go to our link tree right there, and you can see all of our socials. You can also go to Instagram and check out our graphic designer, A51_designs. Don't forget to hit up Sonation Comics for their awesome stuff. And that is enough of the plug-in. We've done all the loving. We'll catch you next time, ladies and gentlemen. AussieVerse, as Ross said, is for life.